Thanks for tuning in. This is a type of blog where I take on some topics and try to put them in the context of at least what I think is sound teaching and a good dose of common sense. I am not claiming that I'm speaking for the church. The church has not granted me that authority. Instead, as a flawed individual and sinner, I want to share with you my pastoral insights gleaned over these past 40 years, which have formed the foundation of my priestly ministry. Basically, this is just my opinion, for whatever it's worth, nothing more. Last time, we were talking about the liturgy, so let's continue with that topic. The sad reality is that so many parishes have sad liturgies. I took some time off a few years ago and set out to attend Mass in as many parishes as I could during those 6 months. There were a few where there were greeters, people who said hello or at least nodded at you as you entered the church. But most services I attended, no one was there to greet me. No one welcomed me. No one offered to assist me. I seated myself and no one introduced themselves. It was like we were all there together, pretending to be alone. In some parishes, I observed lively conversation and clear relationships between parishioners. But that sort of made me feel left out, since none of those people who were greeting and hugging one another or engaged in lively conversations acknowledged that I was even there. I was a stranger that everyone knew wasn't supposed to be there, and everyone was pretending really wasn't there. I can remember in those rare parishes where the connectedness of people was evident, feeling a yearning to be included. Yet no one took the effort to introduce themselves or welcome me. My point is, hospitality is essential. People's first impression begins before they ever take a seat in a church. As a disciple, we need to demonstrate the type of generous, welcoming spirit of Jesus, who always sought to include the stranger, the sinner, the outcast, and yes, even the occasional priest visitor. In almost all the parishes I visited, the music was tired and poorly done. It's amazing to me how many people who really cannot keep on key are cantors. It was also clear that the members of the assembly were not expected to sing, since hardly anyone did sing. At one little parish that actually had a sort of nice little guitar, keyboard, violin group leading song, I really got into the worship experience and sang out like I was used to doing in my own parish. And the lady in front of me turned around and asked me if I wouldn't sing so loud. Sometimes the priest was warm and gave off a vibe of connectedness. Sometimes the priest was awkward and clearly not connected to his assembly. On one occasion, I experienced a priest who seemed actually angry and gave off the vibe that he didn't want to be there. He wanted to be someplace else, doing something else. I realized how important those first few moments are for the celebrant to set the tone for the Mass, to express joy, and extend a sense of welcoming to all present. Then there was the preaching. Well, Catholic priests, well, we're just not known for preaching. I attended law school at a Lutheran school, and I went to chapel every day and was exposed to Lutheran preaching. All during those chapel services, I never, not even once, experienced anything but outstanding preaching that challenged and left me wanting to do and be better. You see, that's it. Preaching should move people to ponder how they can do and be better. Unfortunately, many priests think the homily is a time to talk about what they did that week, or to share their latest vacation, or report on their current health situation. Or they read a homily written by someone else. I have no problem with using a reflection someone else has written, but you got to make it your own. I remember one priest during a sabbatical actually held up the book that the sermon was written in and read it like he was reading a newspaper to the assembly. Other priests go on a type of stream of consciousness, leaving the listener wondering, what's the point? Some priests or deacons repeat themselves as if the point wasn't heard the first 3 or 4 times. Many sermons are really better lectures than homilies. They seek to inform the mind when they ought to be moving the heart. In all fairness, what the preacher has to do is not easy. Think of a 30-minute television show, and after you take out the commercials, you are down to about 18 minutes of material. The show has a team of writers who, by the way, get paid quite a bit to come up with the insipid entertainment that comprises most of the content of television shows these days. Furthermore, a season is only a few weeks long. A priest or deacon has just themselves and whatever homily resources they have, and they have to come up with something every week of the year. Oh yeah, and the pay pretty much sucks. I once asked a Protestant pastor, how long does it take you to prepare your sermon? I was literally stunned by his response. He told me at least 40 hours. How could he do that and still do everything else he has to do? Well, his primary job is preaching, and all the administration and the day-to-day tasks are done by others. Actually, in the Vatican II document, the Decree on the Ministry of Life of Priest, it states in number 4 that the primary task of priests is to preach the faith. Obviously, our lives as priests are also principally concerned with the administration of the sacraments, especially the Eucharist, which the same document makes clear. But my point is, the Church itself instructs priests on the essential importance of preaching. I believe we should take that instruction very seriously. And to do so means that serious time must be given to prayer and reading. Reading and exposing the mind to new ideas is the lifeline of the preacher. To take that type of time requires that you spend an equal amount of time not doing the administrative things that usually fill up the daily life of a priest, especially in a large parish. I think a good preacher has to be also a good delegator. Actually, it's more than that. We priests have to let go of the traditional model of pastoring and let the laity exercise their baptismal commitment by taking over most, if not all, the administrative tasks. It's hard to be a conduit of God's love if you have to fire an employee. It's hard to be obedient to the Spirit's movement if you're so worried about physical things like the budget or the school roof. Someone else needs to take care of that, but that doesn't have to be the pastor. Not only that, but we need to let go of our sense of power and spend our time and energy in doing what God and the Church calls us to do. Preach, quote, preach the faith in words and deeds, end quote. No really good preacher can be good at his craft if he has not surrendered himself to God. Such a surrender is not a one-time event, but a constant process of diminishing our sense of importance in favor of the mission of the Church. Clericalism, the process of maintaining and increasing the power of the cleric, is poison to the mission. The priest or deacon who wishes to preach well must overtly reject any taint of clericalism, or his preaching is going to fail. Don't think you can fake this, because people will know. They sense the inauthentic preacher miles and miles away. No matter how clumsy or eloquent his words, no matter how awkward or polished his presentation, no matter how simple or profound his ideas, if he's not authentic, no one really listens. The leadership of the Church keeps telling us that our homilies need to be like under 10 minutes. Interestingly, Protestant preachers, generally known for good preaching, easily preach 3 or 4 times as long. I get that today's population, shaped and formed by sound bites and short commercials, has developed a short attention span. But what most people tell me that if the sermon is good, it doesn't matter how long it is. I don't know if everyone would agree with that, but under 10 minutes seems to be a stretch. Generally, the sermon should speak to the heart. It cannot just be an exposition of Scripture, although scriptural background can be helpful. It shouldn't be primarily about church dogma, although the teaching of the Church cannot be ignored. Stories can be helpful, illustrations can be helpful, but a sermon that is just a story or illustration moves few and annoys many. Stories about yourself will pique interest, but you should always make yourself the butt of the story, not the hero. I believe a sermon should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. That movement should be clear. The scripture of the day ought to be the springboard, but preaching is not lecturing. And again, illustrations are helpful, but they shouldn't dominate or overshadow your main point. Events of the day can be powerful, but be careful. Today, almost every topic is politicized. And you can set off a political storm you never intended. I've been there and done that. The sermon should touch on real life. People want to take something away with them, feel something that their time listening has provided them with, and also give them something practical. As I have said so many times, if people don't feel it, they won't believe it. The words of a homily must elicit some emotion. Now that emotion might be to disagree with the homilist, and that's okay, because I believe a sermon must also challenge people to see things different, challenge people to do things different, challenge them to think different, challenge them to be a disciple who makes disciples. People don't like to be moved out of their comfort zone, but good preaching is pushing for that all the time. It's hard for the preacher because he knows better than most that he's no paradigm of virtue, no paradigm of perfection. No, at best, he's only an example of an unfinished product. The preacher is on the journey toward holiness like everyone else, and to be honest, many in his assembly are ahead of him. My best efforts as a preacher are those homilies where I preach primarily to myself. Preaching is a cleric's craft, and we should all be looking for ways to improve the mastery of our craft. For example, being aware of the different genres of preaching. I regularly mix them up. I mean, if you've been preaching to a faith community for years and use only one style of preaching, then just on that one fact, you're inviting boredom. I'm personally most comfortable with conversational preaching, but every now and then I'll do a parable preaching or witness preaching, and that can also be effective. Informative preaching sometimes is necessary, but I think it's the least successful. A good preacher shouldn't settle on just one style, mix it up. Good liturgy, as well as good preaching, is like a piece of classical music. It has clear movements, subtleties, and crescendos. Some preachers are monotone, and they stop as they started. And some preachers start out excited and keep that same pace all the way through, and they've lost most of their listeners to exhaustion within 5 minutes. Yes, too much enthusiasm can be just as bad as no enthusiasm. But those of us privileged with the burden of preaching need to take it seriously and regularly try to be better. Preaching is not easy, but the members of your assembly who have been regularly listening to poor sermons have it much harder. Well, that's what I think. What do you think?